The bullet missed Victoria Blake's head by inches, embedding itself in the concrete wall behind her as she rolled up her sleeve, revealing the distinctive green beret tattoo that would change everything the team thought they knew about the soft communications specialist who had just saved their lives. But let's go back to where it all began. 6 hours earlier at the Joint Operations Training Facility in Nevada, where Staff Sergeant Victoria Blake sat quietly at her communications console, fingers dancing across the keyboard with practiced precision. The desert sun blazed through the reinforced windows of the command center, casting harsh shadows across the tactical displays that surrounded her workstation. She adjusted her headset and continued monitoring radio frequencies, her role seemingly mundane compared to the high-stakes training exercise unfolding around her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The facility buzzed with controlled chaos as multiple teams prepared for what was being called the most realistic counter-terrorism simulation ever conducted on American soil. Victoria had been assigned to communications support, a role that kept her safely behind the lines while the real operators handled the action. At least, that's how Commander Phillips had explained it during the morning briefing. "Blake, you'll maintain comms with all teams from the command center," Phillips had said, barely glancing in her direction. His attention was focused on the men who would be leading the assault teams: Russo, Harper, Coleman, and Mitchell, all seasoned operators with multiple deployments under their belts. "Leave the heavy lifting to those who are built for it." Victoria had simply nodded, her expression neutral despite the familiar sting of being sidelined. At 28 years old, she had learned to mask her frustration behind professional composure. Her slight frame and soft-spoken demeanor had earned her the reputation of being too gentle for frontline combat, a perception she had never bothered to correct. There were reasons for her silence, reasons buried beneath layers of classified history that her current unit knew nothing about. The morning briefing had been typical of her experience since transferring to this joint training facility 3 months ago. The scenario involved a multi-building compound where terrorists had taken hostages, including several high-value intelligence assets. The mission required precision, coordination, and split-second decision-making, exactly the kind of operation Victoria had once excelled at, though none of her current colleagues knew that. "This isn't going to be some walk in the park," Russo had announced to the assembled team, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen real combat. "Intelligence suggests we're dealing with at least 20 hostiles, possibly more. They're well-armed and have had time to prepare defensive positions." Harper, a barrel-chested man with graying temples, had nodded gravely. "We go in fast and hard. No room for hesitation or second-guessing." Victoria had watched the briefing with keen interest, her trained eye picking up details in the tactical maps that others seemed to miss. The compound's layout reminded her of similar structures she had encountered during her previous life, structures where she had been the one planning the assault, not watching from the sidelines. "Blake, you'll coordinate with air support and provide real-time intelligence updates," Phillips had continued. "Your job is to keep everyone connected and informed. Think you can handle that?" The question had carried an undertone of condescension that Victoria had learned to ignore. "Yes, sir. I'll maintain clear communications with all teams." Coleman, a younger operator who had recently joined the unit, had looked skeptical. "Just make sure you don't freeze up when things get intense. Communications are crucial, and we can't afford any weak links." Victoria had met his gaze steadily. "I understand the importance of the mission, sir." What they didn't understand was that Victoria Blake had never frozen under pressure. In her previous life, she had been the one others looked to when situations became impossible, when plans fell apart and improvisation meant the difference between success and catastrophe. But that life belonged to someone else now, someone she had chosen to bury beneath a carefully constructed facade of compliance and invisibility. The training facility itself was impressive, designed to replicate real-world scenarios with startling accuracy. Multiple buildings, underground tunnels, and various terrain features created an environment that could challenge even the most experienced operators. Victoria had studied the layout extensively, noting tactical considerations that others had overlooked, escape routes that weren't marked on the official maps, and potential ambush points that could turn a routine operation into a nightmare. As the morning progressed, she watched the assault teams conduct their final equipment checks. Each man carried state-of-the-art weapons and gear, their movements reflecting years of training and experience. They were good at what they did, Victoria had to admit, but they were also predictable. Their tactics followed established doctrine, their approach routes were textbook standard, and their contingency plans were limited to scenarios they had encountered before. Victoria's fingers continued, their steady rhythm across the keyboard, establishing communication protocols and testing equipment connections. Her workstation was equipped with multiple monitors displaying real-time feeds from cameras throughout the compound, satellite imagery, and various data streams that would be crucial during the operation. She had already identified several inconsistencies. In the intelligence briefing, subtle details that suggested the scenario might be more complex than anticipated. But when she had attempted to share these observations during the planning phase, her suggestions had been politely dismissed. "Thanks for the input, Blake, but we've got this covered," Phillips had said. "Stick to what you know best." What she knew best, Victoria reflected with bitter irony, was exactly what they were about to attempt. But revealing that knowledge would require explanations she wasn't prepared to give, truths that would fundamentally change how everyone saw her. For now, she was content to remain in the shadows, at least until circumstances forced her hand. The clock on her console showed 0800 hours. The operation would begin in 30 minutes, and Victoria could feel the familiar pre-mission tension building in the command center. It was a feeling she had experienced countless times before, though always from a very different perspective. Today, she would watch others take the risks she had once embraced, monitor their progress from a safe distance while they faced the dangers she had once sought out. As she made final adjustments to her equipment, Victoria caught her reflection in one of the dark monitors. The woman staring back at her looked nothing like the soldier she had once been. Gone was the confidence that had once defined her, replaced by a carefully maintained mask of quiet competence. Her colleagues saw someone who belonged behind a desk, someone who could be relied upon for support, but never for leadership. If only they knew the truth about Staff Sergeant Victoria Blake, they might think twice about their assumptions. But truth, Victoria had learned, was a luxury she could no longer afford. At least not yet. The operation commenced at precisely 0830 hours with all the ceremony and precision of a real-world mission. Victoria watched through multiple camera feeds as the assault teams moved into position around the compound, their black tactical gear making them nearly invisible against the pre-dawn shadows. From her position in the climate-controlled command center, she could monitor every aspect of the unfolding operation while remaining safely removed from any actual danger. "All teams, this is command," Phillips spoke into his headset, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had orchestrated dozens of similar operations. "Weather is clear, visibility is good. You are green for initial approach." Victoria's fingers moved across her console, coordinating communications between the way. 4 assault teams, air support, and the command element. Each team had been assigned specific objectives within the compound, their movements carefully choreographed to avoid friendly fire incidents while maintaining maximum pressure on the defending forces. "Bravo team, approaching from the north." Russo's voice crackled through the communications system. "Visual contact with 2 sentries at the main entrance. Preparing for initial breach." Harper's team had taken position on the eastern side of the compound, while Coleman's unit approached from the south. Mitchell's team served as the reserve element, positioned to exploit any breakthrough or provide reinforcement where needed. The plan was textbook perfect, following established doctrine for this type of scenario. Victoria studied the tactical displays with growing concern. The assault teams were approaching their objectives with admirable precision, but something felt wrong about the entire scenario. The defending forces seemed too well prepared, their positions too carefully chosen for a standard training exercise. She had noticed irregularities in the intelligence briefing that morning, subtle inconsistencies that suggested the opposition might be more sophisticated than anticipated. "Command, this is Blake," she spoke into her headset, her voice carefully modulated to avoid any suggestion of alarm. "I'm seeing some unusual movement patterns on the thermal imagery. The defenders appear to be repositioning in ways that weren't anticipated in our intelligence assessment." Phillips glanced at her console briefly before returning his attention to the main tactical display. "Blake, stick to communications coordination. The teams are trained to adapt to changing conditions." But Victoria could see what the teams couldn't. The thermal signatures on her advanced monitoring equipment revealed a level of tactical sophistication that went far beyond the capabilities of the role players they were supposed to be facing. The defenders were moving with military precision, establishing overlapping fields of fire and preparing what appeared to be a sophisticated ambush. "Bravo team, you have movement in the northeast tower," Victoria reported, her training compelling her to provide accurate intelligence despite Phillips' dismissive response. "Multiple heat signatures, possibly 3 individuals with what appears to be crew-served weapons." "Copy that, Command," Russo acknowledged. "We see them, nothing we can't handle." Victoria bit back her response. What Russo couldn't see from his ground-level position was the coordinated movement happening throughout the compound. The defenders weren't just reacting to the assault team's approach. They were implementing a comprehensive defensive strategy that suggested professional military training. The first shots were fired at 0847 hours, marking the official beginning of the combat phase. Training ammunition filled the air as Bravo team engaged the sentries at the main entrance, their suppressed weapons creating sharp cracks that echoed across the desert landscape. The role players responded with disciplined return fire, their movements far more coordinated than Victoria had expected. "Taking fire from multiple positions," Harper reported from the eastern approach. "These guys are better than briefed." Victoria's concern deepened as she watched the tactical situation develop. The defending forces were executing textbook defensive tactics, channeling the assault teams into predetermined kill zones, while maintaining communication and coordination that spoke of extensive training. This wasn't the typical opposition force they usually face during training exercises. "Alpha Team, you're walking into a crossfire," Victoria warned, her voice sharp with urgency. "I'm seeing coordinated movement that suggests—" "Blake, maintain radio discipline." Phillips cut her off, his tone carrying clear irritation. "The teams know how to handle themselves." But Victoria could see disaster unfolding in real time. The assault teams were moving according to their predetermined plan, unaware that their opponents had anticipated every move and prepared accordingly. What should have been a straightforward training exercise was rapidly becoming something far more dangerous. Coleman's voice cut through the radio chatter, tension evident despite his professional composure. "Charlie team taking heavy fire from concealed positions. These role players are using live tactics, not training scenarios." Victoria's hands moved across her console, attempting to coordinate support for the beleaguered teams while fighting against the growing realization that something was fundamentally wrong with this entire operation. The defenders were too good, too well coordinated, and far too aggressive for a routine training exercise. "Sir," she addressed Phillips directly, abandoning communications protocol in favor of immediate necessity, "I recommend we halt this exercise and reassess the situation." The opposition force is demonstrating capabilities that weren't in the briefing. Phillips finally turned to face her fully, his expression a mixture of annoyance and condescension. Blake, you're a communications specialist, not a tactical analyst. Let the operators handle the operation while you handle the radios. The dismissal stung, but Victoria had endured worse. What concerned her wasn't her wounded pride, but the safety of the men currently engaged in what was supposed to be a controlled training environment. Every instinct she possessed, honed through years of experience that Phillips knew nothing about, was screaming that this situation was spiraling beyond acceptable parameters. Delta Team is pinned down, Mitchell's urgent voice confirmed her. Worst fears. Request immediate support. These aren't typical role players. Victoria watched the thermal displays with growing alarm as more heat signatures appeared throughout the compound. The defending force was larger than anticipated, better equipped, and demonstrating tactical proficiency that suggested something far more serious than a training exercise was taking place. The command center erupted in controlled chaos as multiple teams simultaneously reported contact with unexpectedly capable opposition forces. Victoria found herself at the center of increasingly desperate communications. Coordinating between teams that were discovering their carefully planned operation was falling apart in real time, but her warnings continued to fall on deaf ears. Her observations dismissed as the overcautious concerns of someone who didn't understand real combat. If only they knew how wrong they were about Staff Sergeant Victoria Blake and exactly how much she understood about situations like this one. As the chaos of the deteriorating operation swirled around her, Victoria's mind drifted to a memory from 15 years earlier. She was 13 years old, sitting in the backyard of their modest home in Colorado Springs, watching her father clean his service weapon with the same methodical precision he brought to everything in his life. Master Sergeant Robert Blake had been a legend in Special Forces circles. Though he rarely spoke about his deployments or the operations that had earned him 2 silver stars and a chest full of other decorations. What he did talk about, in those quiet moments when it was just the two of them, was the importance of seeing what others missed. Victoria, he had said that particular evening, his weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency as he field-stripped his M4 carbine. Most people see what they expect to see. They look at a situation and their mind fills in the blanks based on assumptions. But a real soldier, a true warrior, learns to see what's actually there. Young Victoria had watched him work, fascinated by the way he could disassemble and reassemble the weapon without even looking. His muscle memory guiding movements that had been repeated thousands of times. How do you learn to do that, Dad? Robert. Blake had paused in his work, looking at his daughter with the same intense focus he brought to everything that mattered to him. Practice, patience, and most importantly, never assuming you know everything. The moment you think you've got it all figured out is the moment you miss the one detail that could save your life or the lives of your teammates. He had resumed cleaning the weapon, but continued talking. I've seen brilliant officers make catastrophic mistakes because they were too proud to listen to a corporal who had actually been in the field. I've watched entire operations fail because someone dismissed intelligence that didn't fit their preconceptions. Victoria had absorbed every word, though at 13 she couldn't fully understand the weight of what her father was trying to teach her. It would be years before she truly comprehended the lessons he was passing down. Lessons earned through blood and sacrifice in places whose names would never appear in newspapers. Promise me something, Victoria, he had said, setting down the cleaned weapon and looking directly into her eyes. If you ever decide to serve, and I hope you do because you've got the heart for it, promise me you'll never be afraid to speak up when you see something others miss. Even if they outrank you, even if they dismiss you, even if they think you don't belong. The memory of that conversation had sustained Victoria through years of training that followed. When other girls her age were focused on typical teenage concerns, she was at the shooting range with her father, learning marksmanship fundamentals that would later make her one of the finest shots in Special Forces history. When her classmates were attending school dances, she was studying military history and tactical manuals that her father brought home from his work at Fort Carson. Robert Blake had retired from active duty when Victoria was 16, but his influence on her life only deepened. He had connected her with mentors in the Special Forces community, men who recognized her potential and helped guide her toward a path that few women had ever attempted to follow. "The Green Berets don't care about your gender," one of her father's former teammates had told her during her senior year of high school. "They care about whether you can do the job. If you can meet the standards, if you can perform under pressure, if you can be trusted with the lives of your teammates, then you belong. Everything else is just noise." Those words had carried Victoria through the grueling selection process that followed her enlistment. The Special Forces Assessment and Selection Course had been designed to break candidates, to identify those who possessed not just physical capability, but the mental resilience and moral courage required for the most demanding missions the military could offer. Victoria had been one of only 3 women to attempt the course that year, and the only one to complete it successfully. The training that followed had been even more challenging. Months of intensive instruction in weapons, tactics, languages, and specialized skills that transformed her from a determined young soldier into a lethal and versatile operator. Her father had been there for her graduation ceremony, his pride evident despite his typically stoic demeanor. As he pinned her green beret onto her uniform, he had whispered words that she carried with her through every subsequent deployment. "You've earned the right to wear this. Now earn the right to keep it." The years that followed had been a blur of classified operations in places that didn't officially exist, missions that tested every aspect of her training and character. Victoria had served with distinction in Afghanistan, Iraq, and several other locations that remained classified. Even in her own memory, she had led teams into hostile territory, planned and executed operations that saved countless lives, and earned a reputation as one of the most capable operators in the Special Forces community. But all of that had ended 3 years ago, in a mountainous region of Afghanistan where an operation had gone catastrophically wrong. Victoria remembered the explosion, the chaos, the moment when everything she had trained for and believed in had crumbled around her. She remembered making the hardest decision of her life, a choice that had saved her remaining teammates, but cost her everything she had worked to achieve. The official report had been classified, the details buried beneath layers of national security considerations. Victoria's role in the operation had been quietly erased from official records, her contributions minimized to protect ongoing operations and intelligence sources. When she had finally returned to the United States, it was as someone whose service record had been sanitized and whose achievements had been forgotten. The transition to her current assignment had been presented as a temporary measure, a chance to recover and eventually return to operational status. But Victoria had quickly realized that her previous life was over, that the woman who had once led Special Forces teams into combat was now expected to be satisfied with a support role that kept her safely away from anything resembling real action. The irony was almost unbearable. Here she was, watching men she could have trained struggle with a situation she could have resolved, while being dismissed as someone too soft for the realities of combat. The green beret tattoo hidden beneath her sleeve served as a constant reminder of who she had been and what she had lost. But as the current operation continued to deteriorate around her, Victoria began to wonder if the time for hiding was finally coming to an end. The tactical situation had stabilized momentarily, giving Victoria a brief respite from the increasingly frantic radio traffic. All 4 assault teams had taken defensive positions after their initial advances had been repelled by unexpectedly fierce resistance. The role players, if that's what they actually were, had demonstrated a level of tactical sophistication that had caught everyone off guard. Victoria used the lull to conduct a more thorough, Analysis of the intelligence feeds streaming across her monitors. Her trained eye picked up details that the standard briefing had either missed or deliberately omitted. The compound's defensive positions were too well constructed for a hastily prepared training scenario. The fields of fire had been carefully calculated. The obstacle placement was tactically sound, and the communication patterns she was intercepting suggested a level of coordination that went far beyond typical role-playing exercises. Command. This is Bravo Actual. Russo's voice cut through the relative quiet. We need updated intelligence on enemy positions. These guys are moving like they've got real military training. Phillips glanced at Victoria's console, where detailed thermal imagery displayed the movement patterns of the defending forces. Blake, give them what they need. Victoria studied the displays carefully, her special forces training automatically cataloging defensive positions, escape routes, and potential weak points in the enemy formation. What she saw made her blood run cold. The defenders weren't just well-trained. They were implementing a textbook defensive strategy that would systematically eliminate the assault teams if the current approach continued. Bravo Actual, I'm seeing coordinated movement in sectors 3 and 7, Victoria reported, her voice professional despite her growing concern. Multiple heat signatures suggest at least 15 defenders in prepared positions with overlapping fields of fire. She paused, weighing her words carefully. The next part of her assessment would reveal more tactical knowledge than a communication specialist should possess, but the safety of the teams demanded accuracy over appearance. Additionally, she continued, their positioning suggests they're implementing a defense in depth with prepared fallback positions. Standard frontal assault tactics will result in significant casualties. Phillips turned to stare at her, his expression shifting from mild interest to surprise. Blake, how exactly do you know that? Victoria felt the familiar tension that came with walking the line between helpful intelligence and revealing too much about her background. I've studied the tactical manuals, sir. The positioning patterns are consistent with advanced defensive doctrine. It was technically true, though it failed to mention that she had studied those manuals as part of her Special Forces training and had actually implemented similar defensive strategies during classified operations in hostile territory. Harper's voice interrupted before Phillips could pursue the matter further. Command, we've got movement on the western perimeter. Looks like they're trying to flank our positions. Victoria's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up satellite imagery and thermal data from the western approach. What she saw confirmed her worst fears about the true nature of this operation. The flanking movement was being executed with precision that spoke of extensive military training, coordinated timing that suggested professional communication systems, and tactical awareness that went far beyond role-playing capabilities. Alpha Team, you have approximately 8 individuals moving to establish enfilade fire on your current position, Victoria reported, her voice carrying an urgency that couldn't be mistaken. Recommend immediate displacement to alternate position. 2-7. How do you know about alternate position 2-7? Coleman's voice carried clear confusion. That wasn't in the briefing. Victoria realized her mistake immediately. Alternate position 2-7 was a tactical designation she had identified during her own analysis of the compound, using terrain appreciation skills that a communications specialist wouldn't possess. The position offered superior cover and fields of fire, but recognizing it required the kind of tactical training that her current role didn't include. I noticed it during my initial survey of the area, she said, mentally cursing her slip. It appears to offer better defensive positioning. The explanation was weak, and everyone knew it. Communication specialists didn't conduct tactical terrain analysis, and they certainly didn't identify fighting positions that experienced operators had missed. Victoria could feel Philip studying her with new attention, his previous dismissive attitude replaced by curious scrutiny. Blake, "What's your background before this assignment?" Phillips asked, his tone suggesting the question was more than casual interest. Before Victoria could respond, Mitchell's urgent voice cut through the radio traffic. "Command, we've got a problem. These aren't role players." The statement hung in the air like a physical presence, confirming what Victoria had suspected but hadn't dared voice. The operation they were conducting wasn't a training exercise with enhanced realism. It was something far more dangerous and potentially deadly. "Explain," Phillips ordered, his attention shifting away from Victoria and back to the tactical situation. "The ammunition they're using is live," Mitchell reported, his voice tight with controlled fear. "Actual bullets, not training rounds. Harper's." Then hit. The command center erupted in controlled chaos as the true nature of their situation became clear. What had begun as a routine training exercise had somehow transformed into a real combat operation, with real enemies using real ammunition against teams that had been equipped and briefed for a simulation. Victoria felt a familiar surge of adrenaline as her combat instincts engaged for the first time in 3 years. The carefully constructed facade of the quiet communications specialist began to crack as the warrior she had once been stirred to life. Every fiber of her being wanted to take control of the situation, to implement the tactical solutions her training provided, to lead these men out of the trap they had unknowingly entered. But doing so would require revealing exactly who she was and what she was capable of. It would mean abandoning the safe anonymity she had maintained for 3 years and stepping back into a world that had already cost her everything once before. The radio crackled with increasingly desperate communications as the assault teams found themselves pinned down by an enemy force that seemed to anticipate their every move. Victoria watched the tactical displays with growing alarm, recognizing the signs of a carefully planned ambush designed to eliminate the assault teams systematically. She had perhaps minutes to decide whether to maintain her cover and watch good soldiers die or reveal her true capabilities and risk everything she had worked to protect. The green beret tattoo beneath her sleeve seemed to burn against her skin, a reminder of oaths taken and promises made to never abandon teammates in need. The moment of decision was rapidly approaching, and Victoria Blake was running out of time to choose between safety and honor. The revelation that live ammunition was being used transformed the atmosphere in the command center from controlled professionalism to barely contained panic. Phillips was shouting orders into his headset while simultaneously trying to contact higher headquarters for guidance on a situation that had spiraled completely beyond the parameters of any training exercise. "All teams, this is command," Phillips broadcast, his voice carrying an edge that Victoria had never heard before. "Exercise terminated. Repeat, exercise terminated. All personnel initiate emergency extraction protocols immediately." But the response from the field teams painted a picture of men trapped in a tactical nightmare with no clear escape route. The defending force, now revealed to be something far more dangerous than role players, had positioned themselves to prevent exactly the kind of withdrawal Phillips was ordering. "Negative on extraction, command," Russo reported, his breathing heavy with exertion and stress. "We're pinned down in multiple locations. Enemy has overlapping fields of fire covering all withdrawal routes." Victoria studied the tactical displays with growing alarm, her trained eye immediately recognizing the sophistication of the trap that had been laid. The defending force hadn't just prepared for a training exercise. They had orchestrated a complex ambush designed to eliminate the assault team systematically. Every escape route had been anticipated and covered, every potential rallying point had been pre-targeted, and every tactical option the teams might consider had been countered before it could be implemented. "Coleman here," the radio crackled with another urgent transmission. "Mitchell's team is completely cut off in the eastern building. They've got wounded and no way out." Phillips turned to Victoria, with desperation replacing his earlier condescension. "Blake, I need options. What do you see on those displays? Victoria hesitated for a crucial moment, knowing that any tactical advice she provided would reveal knowledge far beyond her supposed capabilities. But with men trapped and wounded, the luxury of maintaining her cover was rapidly becoming a liability she couldn't afford. "Sir, the enemy has implemented a classic hammer and anvil strategy," she began, her voice carrying a confidence and authority that Phillips had never heard from her before. "They're using the terrain to channel our teams into predetermined kill zones, while maintaining escape routes for themselves." She pointed to specific locations on the tactical display, her analysis revealing patterns that would be invisible to someone without extensive tactical training. "They've positioned Overwatch elements here and here, with mobile assault teams preparing to collapse the pocket around our personnel." Phillips stared at her in amazement. "How do you know all this?" Before Victoria could respond, Harper's voice cut through the radio traffic with an urgency that made everyone in the command center freeze. "Command, we've got company coming. Large force approaching from the north. Military vehicles, heavily armed. This is not a drill." The satellite feed confirmed Harper's worst fears. A convoy of vehicles was approaching the compound at high speed, their heat signatures indicating a significant force equipped with heavy weapons. Victoria counted at least 40 additional personnel in the approaching convoy, transforming an already desperate situation into something that bordered on hopeless. "Command, request immediate air support," Mitchell transmitted, his voice tight with controlled fear. "We're about to be overrun." Phillips was frantically working his radio, trying to contact air support, higher headquarters, and anyone else who might be able to provide assistance. But Victoria could see from his frustrated expressions that he wasn't getting the responses he needed. The communication protocols for a training exercise hadn't included provisions for requesting actual military support, and the bureaucratic machinery wasn't equipped to respond to a crisis that officially wasn't supposed to exist. "Sir," Victoria said quietly, her voice cutting through the chaos in the command center. "We need to act now, or those men are going to die." Phillips turned to face her fully, his earlier assumptions about her capabilities forgotten in the face of the unfolding crisis. "What do you recommend?" Victoria felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her like a physical force. Every instinct she possessed, every lesson her father had taught her, every oath she had taken as a Green Beret was screaming at her to act. But acting would mean revealing everything she had worked to keep hidden, stepping back into a world that had already cost her everything once before. "I need you to trust me," she said, meeting Philip's gaze with steady determination. "And I need you to give me operational control of this situation." The request was so far outside normal protocol that Phillips actually laughed, though there was no humor in the sound. "Blake, you're a communications specialist. You can't possibly—" "Those men are going to die," Victoria interrupted, her voice carrying a steel that Phillips had never heard from her before. "In approximately 15 minutes, that convoy is going to arrive, and they're going to be caught in a crossfire that will eliminate them systematically. Unless we do something right now." She turned to the tactical displays, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency as she began pulling up detailed terrain maps, communication frequencies, and real-time intelligence feeds. "I can get them out, but I need complete authority to coordinate the extraction." Phillips stared at her for a long moment, clearly struggling with the impossibility of what she was proposing. A communication specialist couldn't possibly have the knowledge or authority to coordinate a complex tactical operation, especially one involving hostile forces and live ammunition. But as Mitchell's increasingly desperate radio calls filled the command center, and as the satellite imagery showed the approaching convoy getting closer to their trapped personnel, Phillips found himself facing an impossible choice. He could maintain protocol and watch good soldiers die, or he could trust someone whose capabilities he clearly didn't understand and hope for a miracle. "Do it," he said finally, stepping back from the command console. "But Blake, if you get those men killed..." Victoria was already moving, her hands flying across the controls as she began implementing a plan that was forming in her mind with the clarity that came from years of experience in similar situations. "I won't," she said simply, her voice carrying a quiet confidence that seemed to fill the entire command center. The transformation was immediate and startling. The quiet, unassuming communication specialist was gone, replaced by someone whose very presence commanded attention and respect. Phillips found himself automatically deferring to her authority as she began issuing orders with the precision and confidence of someone born to command. "All teams, this is command," Victoria broadcast, her voice carrying an authority that made everyone listen. "New extraction plan in effect. Stand by for detailed instructions." The crisis had forced her hand, and Victoria Blake was finally ready to show them exactly who she really was. Victoria's transformation was immediate and complete. The hesitant communications specialist vanished, replaced by a tactical commander whose very presence seemed to alter the atmosphere in the command center. Her posture straightened, her voice carried new authority, and her movements displayed the confident precision of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions under extreme pressure. "Bravo team, what's your current ammunition status?" she asked, her tone professional and direct. "Approximately 60% remaining," Russo responded, confusion evident in his voice at the change in Victoria's demeanor. "Alpha team, casualty." "Report," she continued, her fingers already working across multiple displays as she began coordinating information that would be crucial for her developing plan. "Harper's hit in the shoulder, but mobile," came the reply. "Coleman's got a minor leg wound. We're still combat effective." Victoria nodded, though the teams couldn't see her, processing this information along with the tactical intelligence streaming across her monitors. The approaching convoy was now less than 10 minutes away, and the window for any effective action was closing rapidly. "All teams, listen carefully," Victoria broadcast, her voice carrying an authority that made everyone pay attention. "We're implementing immediate tactical withdrawal under cover of coordinated suppressive fire. This is not a retreat. This is a fighting withdrawal that will get you out alive." Phillips watched in amazement as Victoria began issuing detailed tactical instructions with the precision of someone who had done this countless times before. She was coordinating fields of fire, establishing rally points, and designating primary and alternate escape routes with a level of expertise that would have been impressive from a seasoned infantry officer, let alone a communications specialist. "Bravo team, you'll provide overwatch from your current position, while Alpha and Charlie teams displace to rally point 1. Victoria continued, her plan unfolding with military precision. "Delta team will establish a blocking position to prevent enemy reinforcement from the south." "Command, who is this?" Coleman's voice carried clear confusion. "This doesn't sound like Blake." Victoria paused for a moment, realizing that her tactical knowledge was now impossible to hide. The careful facade she had maintained for 3 years was crumbling in real time, but the lives of 4 teams depended on her willingness to abandon her cover completely. "This is your new tactical commander," she replied simply. "Follow my instructions. If you want to get out of this alive." The conviction in her voice was unmistakable, and Victoria could hear the subtle shift in the team's responses as they began to recognize that whoever was giving these orders knew exactly what they were doing. "Rally point 1 is compromised," Russo reported after moving his team to the designated position. "Enemy overwatch has direct fire onto the location." Victoria had anticipated this possibility. Her analysis of the terrain and enemy positions had identified multiple contingencies, and she was already implementing alternate plans before Russo had finished his transmission. "Bravo team, displace to rally point 3, she ordered without hesitation. "Alpha team, provide covering fire from your current position for 30 seconds, then follow Bravo's route." As the teams began executing her instructions, Victoria turned her attention to the approaching convoy. The vehicles were now close enough for detailed analysis, and what she saw confirmed her worst fears about the sophistication of the opposition they were facing. "Phillips," she said, her tone indicating. She was now treating him as an equal rather than a superior. "I need you to contact whoever authorized this operation and find out what we're really dealing with here." Phillips was still staring at her in amazement. "Blake, how do you know how to do this?" "That's not important right now," Victoria replied. Her attention focused on coordinating the withdrawal of men who were fighting for their lives. "What's important is getting those teams out before that convoy arrives." But even as she spoke, Victoria knew that a simple withdrawal wouldn't be sufficient. The enemy forces were too well positioned, too well coordinated, and too numerous for the assault teams to escape through conventional tactics. What was needed was something that would disrupt the enemy's plans and create the chaos necessary for a successful extraction. Victoria made a decision that she knew would change everything. She reached for her sidearm, checking the ammunition and ensuring the weapon was ready for immediate use. The action was so smooth and practiced that Phillips didn't immediately understand what she was doing. "Blake, what are you? I'm going." "Out there," Victoria announced, her voice carrying the calm determination of someone who had made peace with a dangerous decision. "The teams need someone on the ground to coordinate their withdrawal, and they need suppressive fire from an unexpected direction." Phillips grabbed her arm as she moved toward the command center exit. "You can't do that. You're not trained for field operations." Victoria looked at him with an expression that was equal parts amusement and pity. "Commander, I've been trained for exactly this kind of operation, more than you know." She gently but firmly removed his hand from her arm, her movement carrying the unmistakable confidence of someone accustomed to physical confrontation. "Continue coordinating from here. I'll maintain radio contact and provide real-time tactical guidance." "This is insane," Phillips protested. "You're a communications specialist, not an infantry soldier." Victoria paused at the door, turning back to face him with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "No, Commander. I haven't been a communications specialist for a very long time." As she stepped through the door and into the harsh desert sunlight, Victoria felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with entering hostile territory. Her senses heightened, her awareness expanded, and her body moved with the fluid grace of someone whose every action was guided by years of combat experience. The compound was approximately 800 meters from the command center, across terrain that offered minimal cover and maximum exposure to enemy observation. It was exactly the kind of approach that conventional wisdom said was impossible to execute successfully. But Victoria Blake had never been conventional, and the men trapped in that compound were depending on her to do what conventional wisdom said couldn't be done. As she began moving across the open ground, her radio crackled with urgent transmissions from the assault teams. The enemy convoy had arrived, and the final phase of the trap was beginning to close around the men she was racing to save. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Victoria moved across the desert terrain with a fluid grace that would have been impossible for someone without extensive field training. Her approach to the compound utilized every fold in the ground, every piece of available cover, and demonstrated an understanding of tactical movement that came only from years of experience in hostile environments. The radio traffic in her earpiece painted a picture of men fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds. The enemy convoy had deployed approximately 40 additional fighters, who were now systematically tightening the noose around the trapped assault teams. What had begun as a training exercise had transformed into a full-scale combat operation that threatened to end in catastrophe. "Command, this is Bravo Actual." Russo's voice carried the controlled desperation of a professional soldier who understood exactly how dire their situation had become. Enemy force is approximately 60 strong, well-armed and coordinated. We need immediate support, or we're not getting out of here. Victoria keyed her radio while maintaining her rapid approach to the compound's perimeter. Bravo Actual, support is en route. Maintain defensive positions and prepare for coordinated breakout. On my signal. Command, who is this? Russo asked, confusion evident in his voice. Where's Phillips? This is Blake, Victoria replied, her breathing steady despite the physical demands of her cross-country movement. I'm currently approaching your position. From the southwest. The radio fell silent for a moment before Russo responded with barely controlled alarm. Blake, the comm specialist, what are you doing out there? Victoria had reached the outer perimeter of the compound, where she could see the tactical situation with her own eyes for the first time. What she observed confirmed her worst fears about the sophistication of the enemy force they were facing. The defenders weren't just well-trained. They were implementing professional military tactics with equipment and coordination that suggested special operations capabilities. Bravo Actual, I need you to trust me, Victoria said, her voice carrying an authority that made Russo pay attention. Despite his confusion, in approximately 2 minutes, I'm going to create a distraction that will give you an opportunity to displace to a better position. She studied the enemy positions through her field glasses, her trained eye automatically, cataloging targets, escape routes, and tactical opportunities. The enemy force had positioned themselves with textbook precision, but their very adherence to doctrine created predictable patterns that could be exploited by someone with sufficient knowledge and skill. Victoria unslung her rifle, a standard M4 carbine that she had requisitioned from the command center's armory. The weapon felt familiar in her hands, despite the 3 years that had passed since she had last carried one in combat. Her muscle memory guided her movements as she checked. The action verified her ammunition count and prepared for what she was about to attempt. All teams, this is Blake, she broadcast, her voice carrying the calm confidence of someone who had done this many times before. I have visual on enemy positions. Prepare for immediate tactical displacement on my signal. What happened next would have been impossible for anyone without Victoria's unique combination of training, experience, and natural ability. She had identified a weakness in the enemy's positioning that would allow her to create the kind of chaos necessary for the assault teams to break contact and escape. The first shot was fired at maximum effective range, a precisely placed round that eliminated the enemy's forward observer, who had been coordinating indirect fire against the trapped teams. The shot was so clean and so unexpected that it took several seconds for the enemy force to realize they were taking fire from an entirely new direction. Victoria had already displaced to a secondary firing position by the time the enemy began responding to her attack. Her second shot eliminated a machine gun team that had been providing overwatch for the main assault force, creating a gap in their defensive coverage that the assault teams could exploit. All teams, displacement now, Victoria ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos as enemy forces began scrambling to respond to this unexpected threat. From her elevated position, Victoria could see the assault teams beginning to move with the coordinated precision of professional soldiers who recognized an opportunity when they saw one. Russo led his team toward the gap she had created in the enemy line, while Harper's wounded team used the distraction to reach better defensive positions. But the enemy force was adapting quickly to the new threat. Victoria could see them repositioning to counter her attack, their movements suggesting a level of tactical sophistication that concerned her deeply. Whoever these people were, they weren't typical opposition forces or enhanced role players. They were genuine military professionals with real combat experience. Victoria's third shot was the most difficult, requiring her to engage a target at nearly 800 meters while under increasing counter fire from enemies who were beginning to locate her position. The shot eliminated an enemy commander who had been coordinating the response to her attack, creating additional confusion that the assault teams were already beginning to exploit. "Command, I don't know who Blake really is," Coleman's voice came through the radio with a mixture of amazement and gratitude. "But she just saved our lives." Victoria was already moving again, using fire and movement tactics that had been drilled into her during Special Forces training. The enemy was beginning to understand that they were facing someone with capabilities far beyond what they had anticipated, and their response was becoming increasingly aggressive and coordinated. "Blake, this is Phillips," the command center finally broke into the tactical frequency. "What's your status?" "Currently providing overwatch for team displacement," Victoria replied while engaging another target. "Enemy forces larger and better equipped than intelligence indicated. Recommend immediate request for backup and medical support." As she spoke, Victoria was already planning her next move. The assault teams were making good progress toward the extraction point, but the enemy force was regrouping and would soon mount a coordinated counterattack that could trap them again. What was needed was something that would keep the enemy off balance long enough for the teams to reach safety. Victoria made a decision that would reveal capabilities she had hoped never to use again. She reached into her tactical vest and retrieved equipment that wasn't standard issue for communications specialists, a small device that would allow her to coordinate precision strikes with devastating effectiveness. The quiet, unassuming staff. Sergeant Blake was gone completely now, replaced by someone whose very presence on the battlefield was changing the tactical calculus in favor of the trapped assault teams. But revealing her true capabilities meant there would be no going back to the anonymity she had carefully maintained. As enemy forces began a coordinated assault on her position, Victoria prepared to show them exactly what a former Green Beret was capable of when the lives of her teammates were at stake. The enemy's counterattack came with the coordinated precision of a professional military unit. Victoria found herself taking fire from multiple directions as the hostile force attempted to overwhelm her position through sheer volume of concentrated firepower. Bullets struck the rocky outcropping where she had taken cover, sending fragments of stone and dust into the air around her. But instead of being suppressed by the incoming fire, Victoria responded with the calm efficiency of someone who had faced similar situations countless times before. She moved through the available cover with fluid grace, engaging targets with precise shots while simultaneously coordinating the assault team's withdrawal through her radio. "Alpha Team, you have a clear route to Extraction Point 2, she reported while engaging an enemy machine gun position. "Charlie Team, maintain suppressive fire for 30 more seconds, then follow Alpha's route." The precision of her shots and the tactical sophistication of her coordination were beginning to have a noticeable effect on both friendly and enemy forces. The assault teams were making steady progress toward safety, while the enemy force was becoming increasingly frustrated by their inability to pin down or eliminate the lone operator who was systematically disrupting their carefully planned ambush. It was during one of her tactical movements that disaster nearly struck. Victoria was displacing from one firing position to another when an enemy sniper, better positioned and more patient than his colleagues, fired a shot that came closer to ending her life than any had in 3 years. The bullet struck the rocky ground inches from her head, sending sharp fragments of stone slicing through the air. One particularly large piece caught the sleeve of her tactical shirt, tearing through the fabric and leaving a gash that extended from her shoulder nearly to her elbow. Victoria rolled behind cover, automatically checking herself for wounds while maintaining awareness of the tactical situation around her. The rock fragment had cut through her shirt but had barely scratched her skin. What it had done, however, was something far more significant than any physical injury. The torn fabric hung loose, exposing her upper arm and revealing, for the first time since arriving at this assignment, the distinctive tattoo that she had. kept hidden beneath long sleeves and careful positioning for 3 years. The green beret insignia was rendered in precise detail, the distinctive headgear surrounded by the motto "De oppresso liber," to free the oppressed. But this wasn't just any green beret tattoo. The additional elements surrounding the central design told a story of service that few would understand, but that those who knew would immediately recognize. The crossed arrows indicated airborne qualification. The lightning bolt represented special operations. The small silver star marked her as having served in a classified unit, whose very existence was known only to those with the highest security clearances. Most telling of all was the small number 10 incorporated into the design, indicating her membership in the 10th Special Forces Group, one of the most elite units in the United States military. Victoria keyed her radio, unaware that the torn sleeve had exposed the tattoo that would change everything. All teams, continue displacement. I'm maintaining overwatch from current position. Blake, Russo's voice came through the radio with a tone that made Victoria immediately alert. I need you to look at your left arm. Confused by the seemingly random request, Victoria glanced down and immediately understood. The torn sleeve had exposed not just her tattoo, but the secret she had guarded so carefully. 3 years of careful concealment had been undone by a fragment of stone and a moment of combat that she couldn't have predicted or prevented. Well, I'll be damned. Coleman's voice carried amazement that bordered on disbelief. Blake, is that what I think it is? Victoria looked at the exposed tattoo, then at the tactical situation around her, and made a decision that had been inevitable since the moment she had taken operational control of this disaster. There was no point in continuing the deception when the evidence was literally written on her skin. Bravo team, this is Master Sergeant Victoria Blake, formerly of the 10th Special Forces Group, she said, her voice carrying the new authority that made everyone on the frequency pay attention. And right now, we have bigger problems than my service record. The revelation sent shock waves through the radio traffic. Philip's voice cut through the chatter with barely controlled amazement. Blake, you're Special Forces? Former Special Forces, Victoria corrected while engaging another enemy position. Currently focused on getting your people out alive. But even as she spoke, Victoria could see that the enemy force was adapting to her presence with a level of tactical sophistication that suggested they understood exactly what they were now facing. The random, uncoordinated attacks had been replaced by a methodical approach designed specifically to counter a lone sniper with advanced training. Master Sergeant, Harper's voice carried a mixture of respect and urgency. We've got multiple wounded, and the enemy is regrouping for another assault. What are your orders? The question hung in the air, representing the complete reversal of the command structure that had existed just hours earlier. The communications specialist who had been dismissed and overlooked was now being asked to take tactical command of a desperate situation by men who had initially questioned her right to even be present. Victoria studied the tactical situation with the experienced eye of someone who had planned and executed similar operations in hostile territory around the world. The enemy force was larger and better equipped than anything a training exercise should have included, but they were also following predictable patterns that could be exploited by someone with sufficient knowledge and experience. All teams were implementing a fighting withdrawal to Extraction Point 4, Victoria announced, her voice carrying the calm confidence of someone who had done this before. I'll provide overwatch and suppressive fire to cover your movement. As she began coordinating the complex tactical operation that would either save the assault teams or get them all killed, Victoria felt the familiar surge of purpose that had defined her previous life. The green beret tattoo on her exposed arm served as a reminder of oaths taken and capabilities earned through years of the most demanding training the military could provide. The quiet, unassuming communications specialist was gone forever, replaced by the warrior she had always been but had chosen to hide. Now with lives hanging in the balance and her true identity exposed, Victoria Blake was finally free to show them exactly what special forces training could accomplish when applied by someone who had mastered every aspect of the deadly art of warfare. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since the crisis began, the men trapped in that compound had real hope for survival. With her true identity revealed and tactical command officially acknowledged, Victoria began implementing an extraction plan that drew upon years of special forces training and combat experience. The enemy force might have been larger and better equipped than anticipated, but they were also facing someone whose expertise in unconventional warfare had been honed through the most demanding military training in the world. "All teams, listen carefully," Victoria broadcast, her voice carrying the absolute authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. "We're going to execute a coordinated breakout that will get everyone to the extraction point safely. This requires precise timing and absolute trust in the plan." She began coordinating a complex tactical operation that would have impressed seasoned infantry officers. Using her elevated position and superior field of view, Victoria could see patterns in the enemy's positioning that the trapped teams couldn't detect from their ground-level perspectives. "Bravo team, I need you to provide suppressive fire on the eastern machine gun position for exactly 45 seconds, she ordered while simultaneously engaging targets on the western side of the compound. "Alpha team, during that window, you'll have a clear route to intermediate position 7. The precision of her coordination was immediately apparent as the plan began unfolding exactly as she had described. Russo's team laid down accurate suppressive fire that forced the eastern machine gun crew to take cover, while Harper's team moved swiftly through the gap Victoria had identified in the enemy's defensive coverage. "Charlie team, you're next," Victoria continued, her rifle cracking steadily as she eliminated threats that could interfere with the withdrawal. "Wait for my signal, then move directly to position 9. Delta team will cover your movement." What impressed the assault teams most wasn't just Victoria's tactical knowledge, but her ability to maintain perfect situational awareness while simultaneously engaging multiple targets at extended range. Every shot she fired had a specific purpose. In the larger tactical picture, creating opportunities and eliminating threats with surgical precision. "Master Sergeant," Coleman's voice carried grudging admiration, "your marksmanship is unlike anything I've ever seen." Victoria's response was interrupted by the distinctive sound of approaching helicopters. Phillips had apparently succeeded in requesting actual military support, and the cavalry was finally arriving in the form of attack helicopters that could provide the heavy firepower needed to suppress the enemy force completely. "All teams, air support inbound," Victoria announced, her voice carrying satisfaction at this development. "Continue withdrawal to extraction point 4. Gunships will provide cover for final extraction." But even as the helicopters appeared on the horizon, Victoria realized that the enemy force was preparing one final, desperate attempt to eliminate the assault teams before air support could intervene effectively. She could see them massing for a coordinated assault that would overwhelm the teams' defensive positions through sheer numbers and firepower. "All teams, enemy assault imminent," Victoria warned, her tactical analysis revealing the approaching threat. "Prepare for heavy contact in approximately 2 minutes. What followed was the kind of firefight that Victoria had hoped never to experience again. The enemy force launched their assault with professional coordination, using suppressive fire and movement techniques that spoke of extensive military training. But they were facing assault teams that were now being coordinated by someone whose expertise in small unit tactics was unmatched. Victoria's rifle spoke continuously as she engaged priority targets, her shots disrupting the enemy's coordination and creating gaps in their assault formation that the friendly teams could exploit. When one assault team found themselves nearly overwhelmed, Victoria shifted her fire to provide direct support, her precision shooting eliminating threats with deadly efficiency. "Alpha Team, displace now," she ordered during a brief lull in the enemy fire. "I've got Overwatch on your route." Harper's team moved swiftly toward the extraction point, their movement covered by Victoria's suppressive fire and the increasingly effective intervention of the arriving attack helicopters. The gunships began engaging the enemy force with devastating precision, their heavy weapons creating chaos in the enemy ranks. "Charlie Team, you're clear for final movement," Victoria announced as the helicopter gunfire reached maximum intensity. "Delta Team, provide rear guard and follow immediately." The coordination between Victoria's ground-level tactical control and the air support created a devastating combination that the enemy force couldn't counter effectively. Within minutes, their carefully planned ambush had collapsed into a fighting retreat as they sought to escape the combined firepower of professional military units. "All teams at extraction point," Russo reported, his voice carrying relief and exhaustion. "Casualties are stable, and we're ready for pickup." Victoria maintained her Overwatch position as medical helicopters arrived to evacuate the wounded and extract the assault teams. Her role in the operation was far from over, but the immediate crisis had passed and the men she had been determined to save were finally safe. "Master Sergeant Blake," Philip's voice came through the radio with a tone that carried profound respect. "Outstanding work. That was the finest tactical coordination I've ever witnessed." As the extraction helicopters departed with their precious cargo of wounded soldiers, Victoria began her own withdrawal from the battlefield. The enemy force had scattered into the desert, their ambush plan completely shattered by the intervention of someone they had never anticipated facing. But as Victoria made her way back toward the command center, she knew that this operation had changed everything. The careful anonymity she had maintained for 3 years was gone forever, replaced by a reputation that would follow her wherever her career might lead. The attack helicopters continued their patrol over the compound, ensuring that any remaining enemy forces were thoroughly suppressed. Victoria watched them work with professional appreciation, remembering similar operations from her previous life, when she had been the one calling in such support. Her radio crackled with post-operation communications as the various units began coordinating medical care, intelligence gathering, and the investigation that would inevitably follow such an unprecedented breach of training exercise protocols. But Victoria's immediate concern was simpler, ensuring that all personnel were accounted for and that the threat had been completely neutralized. "Command, this is Blake," she reported as the command center came into view. "Threat neutralized. All friendly personnel extracted safely. Returning to base for debrief." The response came not from Phillips but from a voice she didn't recognize, carrying the authority of someone much higher in the command structure. "Master Sergeant Blake. This is Brigadier General Armstrong. We need to talk." The debriefing room at the Joint Operations Training Facility had been transformed into an impromptu command center, with senior officers, intelligence analysts, and medical personnel creating a controlled chaos of post-operation activity. Victoria sat at the center of it all, her torn sleeve still exposing the green beret tattoo that had changed everything, fielding questions from personnel whose security clearances were high enough to understand the full implications of what had just occurred. Brigadier General Armstrong was a compact man with steel-gray hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades making difficult decisions under impossible circumstances. He studied Victoria with the intense focus of someone trying to reconcile the quiet communication specialist he had heard about with the tactical expert who had just orchestrated one of the most successful small unit operations he had witnessed in 30 years of service. "Master Sergeant Blake," he began, his voice carrying the weight of command authority, "your official service record indicates a communications specialty with no combat deployments. Care to explain the discrepancy?" Victoria met his gaze steadily, recognizing that the time for evasion and half-truths had passed completely. "Sir, my actual service record is classified at a level that apparently wasn't shared with this command. I served with the 10th Special Forces Group for 6 years, with multiple deployments and classified operations." Armstrong nodded slowly, already, having suspected as much from the preliminary investigation that had begun the moment Victoria's true capabilities had been revealed. "And your assignment to this facility?" "Administrative placement following a classified incident that required my removal from operational status," Victoria replied, her professional composure intact despite the personal pain that discussing this topic inevitably caused. The general studied her for a long moment before continuing. "The operation you just conducted saved the lives of 16 men and neutralized a threat that our intelligence services are still trying to fully understand. The enemy force you faced wasn't part of any approved training exercise." This revelation confirmed what Victoria had suspected from the beginning. The sophistication of the opposition, the live ammunition, the coordinated tactics, none of it had been consistent with even the most realistic training scenarios. "Sir, what exactly were we dealing with out there?" Victoria asked, her tactical mind still processing the implications of what they had faced. "A foreign intelligence operation designed to eliminate or capture a high-value asset who was supposed to be participating in today's exercise," Armstrong replied, his expression grim. "Someone leaked the details of our training scenario to hostile forces who saw an opportunity to conduct an operation on American soil. The implications were staggering. What had appeared to be a training exercise had actually been a sophisticated intelligence operation that had nearly succeeded in eliminating an entire American Special Operations Unit. Victoria's intervention had prevented what could have been a devastating loss of both personnel and classified capabilities." "Master Sergeant," Armstrong continued, "your actions today prevented a catastrophic intelligence breach and saved them. Lives of some of our most experienced operators. The question now is what happens next." Victoria had been dreading this moment since the first shot had been fired. Her careful anonymity was gone, her classified background was exposed, and the quiet life she had built over the past 3 years was finished. But as she looked around the room at the men she had helped save, she realized that perhaps it was time to stop hiding from who she really was. "Sir, I'm ready to return to operational status if that's what's needed," she said, the words carrying more weight than she had expected. Armstrong smiled for the first time since entering the room. "Master Sergeant, we're not just returning you to operational status. We're promoting you to Sergeant Major and placing you in charge of the new Joint Special Operations Training Program." The announcement sent a ripple of surprise through the room. Victoria stared at the general in amazement, hardly able to process what she was hearing. "Sir, I'm not sure I understand," she said carefully. "Today proved that our current training protocols are inadequate for the threats we're actually facing," Armstrong explained. "We need someone with your combination of operational experience and tactical expertise to develop new training standards that will prepare our people for real-world scenarios." Phillips, who had been silent throughout the debriefing, finally spoke up. "General, Sergeant Major Blake's performance today was beyond exceptional. She demonstrated capabilities that I've never seen matched in 20 years of service." The endorsement from the man who had initially dismissed her abilities carried particular weight, representing the complete transformation in how Victoria was perceived by everyone who had witnessed her actions. 6 months later, Sergeant Major Victoria Blake stood before a classroom filled with the military's most promising young officers. Her green beret tattoo now visible on her rolled-up sleeves as she conducted advanced tactical training that incorporated lessons learned from real-world operations. "The most important thing you can learn," she told the assembled group, "is that combat rarely unfolds according to plan. Your ability to adapt, to see opportunities that others miss, And to make difficult decisions under extreme pressure will determine not just your own survival, but the survival of everyone who depends on you. In the back of the classroom, a young female lieutenant named Hayes listened with intense concentration, taking notes on every word. After the session, she approached Victoria with the same determination that Victoria remembered feeling years ago when she had first decided to pursue Special Forces training. "Sergeant Major," Hayes began, "I want to apply for Special Forces selection. Everyone says I'm too small, too young, too inexperienced. But after hearing about what you accomplished, I think I might have what it takes." Victoria studied the young officer, seeing in her the same fire and determination that had once driven her own pursuit of excellence. "Lieutenant, the only person who can determine whether you have what it takes is you. But if you're willing to work harder than you've ever worked in your life, if you're willing to be underestimated and prove them wrong through performance rather than words, then you might just surprise everyone." Hayes nodded eagerly, her eyes bright with the possibility of following in Victoria's footsteps. "Remember," Victoria added, thinking of her father's words and the lessons that had sustained her through years of challenges, "it's not about being seen, it's about seeing what others miss. That's what makes the difference between good soldiers and great ones." As Hayes walked away to begin her own journey towards Special Forces selection, Victoria smiled with the satisfaction that came from knowing the cycle was continuing. The legacy her father had passed to her was now being passed to a new generation, ensuring that the lessons learned through sacrifice and dedication would continue to protect those who served, and those they were sworn to defend. The quiet communications specialist was gone forever, but in her place stood someone whose true capabilities could finally be acknowledged and utilized to their full potential. Victoria Blake had found her way home to the warrior she had always been, and the future looked brighter than it had in years. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.